Welcome to week 10. This is our last week of new content material, and there's actually a lot to get to. This is not going to be the most extensive part of the course. However, there is a lot to get to in this. We're going to talk about GUI programming today. GUI is graphical user interface, and it's basically what makes your programs look more like things that you're used to seeing when you're using your computer, as opposed to like sitting out in that black window the whole time. So let's jump right into it because there is again a lot to get into. We're going to start with something called the tkinter module. Tkinter is basically how we're going to put all these graphical things on the screen. TK stands for toolkit. It's just a module that we're going to import, and there's all kinds of things within this. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of what we call widgets, how we organize them, buttons, dialog boxes, getting input, using labels, and all kinds of fun stuff. We're just going to jump right into it because there's a lot. What I do want to caveat, we have skipped some chapters, as you may have noticed. We skipped the chapters on object-oriented programming. And while we have covered some of dot notation, we haven't really covered objects completely. We certainly have skipped over the part about classes. This is still an intro-level course. So if you're going to utilize the book code for any of the things that we're going to talk about in this chapter, we're going to need you to do a few things. I'll repeat this later on, but we're not going to use the self-referencing objects. We're not going to use the class definitions or the class, declaration. And at the very end, where you call a my something module or class, we're not going to be doing that as well. You can just use regular main for that. In fact, in a better cop out for you all, you can actually make use of just one giant long program. I won't care, at least for next week's lab, if you don't use a main. For other labs, that might be different. But at least for this first introductory level of working through the process we're going to talk about today, one main program like we did it for the first few weeks would be fine. So let's get into this. What is a GUI? It stands for Graphical User Interface. User interface is the part of the computer with which a user will interact. You might use your mouse, you might use your keyboard, and you're looking at the screen. That's a user interface. It's how somebody enters things and reads things back. We've been working with a command line interface. That would be the black window that we see, and we type in code into one, or mine's black, yours might be white. We type code into it, and then the program runs inside that window, though, and it's all text. So it's command line based, as opposed to a graphical user interface, which allows other users, to interact through graphical elements. And again, think about how you would launch something. You click the little Windows button. You highlight something on the screen with your mouse and you click. Think about Word. You have a bold and an italic button. You type things into certain areas. You scroll. There's other things. It's very different than how we've been programming so far. This is your command line interface. This is what it kind of looks like. It's some kind of screen with some kind of prompt. You type, and it's pretty text heavy, and that's about it. As opposed to the graphical user interfaces that we go over, everybody's seen something similar to this. Macs are entirely, and there's a terminal window you can use, but they're, for the most part, almost entirely graphical interfaced. Dialog boxes are basically a small window that displays information. You might have different things you can interact with, buttons, maybe a slider. There might be some other icons in there you can click or select, and I think it's the interface that most of us are pretty used to. When we start writing GUI programs, we need to understand the difference between the text environment and the graphical environment. And the biggest thing with a text environment is that the program determines how things will happen. Meaning, you ask a user, hey, input some data into this box or into this window that we're typing in. It will do some processing. It'll give something back to that user. It might loop a few times or loop until the user enters something the right way or the user says that they are done. But the program itself is kind of guiding the user, saying, you must do this. Now you must do this. Now you must do this until you tell me otherwise. And the program dictates how the user will behave, or at least how the user should behave. In a graphical environment, it's not program driven or user driven so much as it is event driven. And the user does determine how things happen. In the meantime, the graphical environment is what's called listening for events to happen. For example, if the user moves their mouse, that little arrow goes across the screen, but the entire screen has to be redrawn. If you hover over an icon, it might highlight. When you click on an icon, it definitely highlights. If you scroll down the page, certain things happen and things are redrawn. So the user kind of does their own thing, right, to cause certain events to happen, and the program listens for something to happen and then responds accordingly. As you move your mouse, it has to redraw where the mouse previously was. So you're not covering text up or covering something else up. When you click on something, it highlights something, and the program responds to the click action. But it's not sitting there leading the user down a path saying, you must do this first, you must do this next. It is totally driven by the user and then listens for various signals of what may have happened with the user while they're interacting with that interface. So in Python, we can create very simple graphical programs, GUI programs. Tkinter comes with Python. This is not going to be like the matplot library that we used a while back. This actually is built in. You just have to invoke it using, the import statement that we've been using all along. And what the module does is it allows us to create what are called widgets. A widget is basically the fun word somebody came up with long ago for any graphical element that a user can interact or work with. It's created and presented and controlled by a GUI program. So a couple caveats here. Many programs that use Tkinter do not always run reliably under idle. We're going to keep things simple, so what we're going to work on here should pretty much have no problems. The best practice, though, if you want to go a lot further down the road with Python and making graphical user interfaces and graphical programs, is you might want to use a different text editor or IDE and run that program that you create from the command line after you save it, whether it's a terminal window or whether it's from a command line. That's the best when you're doing graphical programming. Most programmers kind of take an object-oriented approach when they're writing GUI programs. Again, we're not doing that. It is the best practice since Tkinter is basically a module full of objects. The objects are not in the scope, as I said, of this introductory class. We'll refine most of the stuff that we're doing thus far over the next 5 weeks, but we're not going to actually go down the road of object-oriented programming. So one of the things that you will see, especially in the book's examples, is a __init___ method, and that is basically like our main, only it's a main for class. It builds the main GUI. We're going to work around that. It's very possible to do. Again, we're keeping things simple. We're not going very far into the Tkinter module. Just understand that it's there, how it works, and how it interacts with the other stuff in Python that you've learned thus far. So again, what's a widget? A widget is basically any graphical element that we can create using the toolkit. So we might have things like buttons, right? And the button looks like this. I think we're all familiar with it. We see quit or OK or cancel buttons all the time. You might see a menu, which is the file up here, okay? And there might be more things in there. We might get these little label boxes that kind of encircle a whole area, and you might have, kind of a grouping, so to speak, and then some kind of text to go along with it. So these would be command buttons. This would be data entry down here, choosing from a list or choosing from other choices. And those are, these are little grouping symbols to label around them. Right here we also have entry boxes. This is a single line of text entry box. This is a full block of text entry. We can have a numerical incrementer input here. We can have a sliding scale with different styles. Okay, we can have what are called list boxes and combo boxes. A list box has a bunch of choices, looks like text, but when you click on one of these, only one of them actually highlights. Or a combo box, sometimes these are called drop-down lists. You open up the little arrow here, more choices fall down for you. Checkboxes and radio buttons, we'll see these as well too. And as you can see, the Tkinter module has a whole bunch of things that we can do. And all of these elements are pretty much defined inside the module. We can create any one of these things, and we're going to learn a lot of them today. And again, lots to go off of, so let's keep going. How do we make a window? How do we do this? Well, it's really quite simple. Let's get our idle environment up and running here. We'll slide this right over, and we're just going to type. I'll make this smaller so you can see it, although I'm going to cover up the whole screen here. But let's just start. New file. Let's do this. Import tkinter window equals tkinter dot. This is a capital TK to make that function. Now again, this is nothing new. Import statement we should be comfortable with at this point. We're importing that module. Window is our variable. It is going to be assigned whatever the return value of that tkinter.tk function is. Okay? And then the one that's kind of interesting here is window.main loop. Now, why would we have a loop? And that's a very funky kind of loop. Well, first of all, main loop is a method that it's part of the tkinter module. And it is now a method of our window variable. Much like we worked with strings, and the strings have methods like is printable or that kind of thing. We have a .main loop method. So let's think about this. Why do we have a loop, and why is it a method? Well, what is a loop? Real simple question. Don't overthink it. It's basically something that repeats over and over again in your code until some condition is met. It might be a pretest. It might be, not. But I did say earlier that GUIs are event-driven, right? A graphical interface program is event-driven. When you move your mouse, when you click on something, something has to happen, okay? When you click into a tab or into a field, when you click on a button or on a checkbox, something happens. Something has to be drawn. Something has to be redrawn. And in fact, the window that you're looking at in an interface keeps getting drawn over and over again, and you know this because if you've ever taken a picture using your camera over a computer screen or of a TV screen, you always get those scan lines, those horizontal lines in there. That's the computer actually redrawing fast enough. We don't see it with the naked eye because it happens so fast, but a still shot from your camera definitely shows it. So this main loop waits for events to happen, and it basically keeps repeating over and over again until it hears one of these events kick off. The mouse was moved, something was clicked, whatever. And then when that happens, that loop, while it's iterating, waiting, calls out and calls a function to do something. And all of this is handled for you by tkinter during that loop process. So that's what we got. Let's save this right up here. Go to the desktop. We'll just say new window. We'll just run this. And if I run it, here's a window. It popped up on the other side of my screen, but there you are. That's it. Well, that's not much. Well, no, it isn't much. We made a window. That's pretty much all we made. Okay? But it's a start. This is the start of our graphical interface. And as you can see, it looks like a window. I can resize this. I can make it as big or as small as I want. It's kind of have a title here. I can resize it. I can drag it around. I can minimize it. I can bring it back if I find where it went. I can maximize it, make it the full size of the screen. I can unmaximize it, and I can click an X and close it. And look, at that point, my prompt comes back. Let's do that again with subtle. Let me do that again. You can see how that works out here. We have our window. It's here. If you're looking at this Python shell window, okay, we don't have a prompt yet. We restarted the program. It's right here. When I close this, then we'll get these 3 arrow prompts back again. Watch. Close, and there's our prompt. Meaning Python was running the entire time that window was up to prove to you that it was actually, running a program. So that is tkinter. Very simple. It is extremely simple to just make a simple window object and let it run. The main loop does pretty much everything for you at that point. Now again, a plain old window is not much to go off of. So we've got to do some other things along with this to, make things, look a little more normal. So I'm going to start with this. We're going to talk about the label widget. Label basically says, hey, here's a line of text that we can just kind of shove into a window somewhere. So of course, we're going to do the hello world, if you will, of making a window. So again, we have our import tkinter line here. I've got a main function, just because. We have our window equals tkinter.tk. We have our window main loop, but now we also have 2 other things. I got a variable called words. And again, I can call this whatever I want. Words becomes a tkinter.label. And that's a function that you pass some parameters to, and we will get a text label out of it. So the first thing we're passing it, and this is true for pretty much any widget we create, the first parameter you pass is, hey, where is this widget that I'm building going? We're going to make a label widget, which is a text widget. I'm going to put this into window, which is defined by this. Now, some people do like to call window, the variable itself, a lot of things. They might call it their root window. Your book uses main underscore window. Call it what you like. It's a variable. Just make sure you know what it is. When you work with widgets, there are multiple things to do for each widget you create. And therefore, when I've said previously that it's really necessary to declare your variables, in widget creation, you're sometimes creating things as you go, and that's understandable. However, definitely try to leave some comments. Maybe you even leave comments at the top up here that tell somebody, hey, we can do something like this and just make it look nicer and say, widgets. We have window, and that's the main window. We have we have words, and that will be the main text label widget. Okay, and whatever else we might actually do. That's always helpful. Is it necessary? No. Will it keep your head straight when you start writing really long programs that have multiple widgets and then multiple places to put them? Yes, absolutely. So keep that in mind. But we're going to create a lot of things on the fly. We're going to pretty much break most of the rules and guidelines that I've asked you to keep so diligently through the course of the last 10 weeks. Know that it's temporary just for this week. Here we go. So words. Again, plain old variable. It's going to get the result of this tkinter.label module function. And we're giving it two parameters. One is window, which is our main window where we want to put this text label widget. It's going in window. Then we're going to give it some text because obviously it's text. We're going to write the words hello world. Now, that just creates a label object. And it says it's destined to go in window, but it doesn't actually put it there. Because when you have a window, there's a certain management of the layout of what's inside that window that has to go on. There are methods that go along with that to put these widgets into the window and arrange them in a neat fashion. There's grid layouts. There's we're going to talk about frames later on, and then the simplest one is called pack, and it basically says, hey, just pack this right into window, as small as you possibly can, saving as much space as possible. Kind of like if you're packing a suitcase and you just can't decide all those things that you shouldn't bring, but you just keep shoving and shoving. Kind of thing that you'll see in cartoons where people are sitting on their suitcase trying to close it up, that kind of thing. Think that for pack. Make things as small as possible. That's what pack says. So, again, one last time run through it. We're importing tkinter. We have a window equals our main TK module to create the main window. I've got a variable called words that is assigned a label that's going to eventually go in window with the words hello world. Then we have words.pack, and pack says take that variable words, take that object called words, which is our label widget, and put it where it's supposed to go, which we defined as window when we first declared the variable. We've got our main loop, and we're going to run this. And I gotta save it? Yeah, I'll save it because I just did that. Now, because it comes in their screen, this is it right here. I don't even know where to put it, it's so small. Right there, hello world. It doesn't look like much. Yes, lean forward, get close, squint, and you might miss it. I'm going to make the window bigger, but you can see hello world is in here. I can't even select the text. There's nothing else. It's not very fancy. It's just plain old, plop, here it is, hello world. That's a label. That's what it looks like. I can close this. We can do it again. We can do something like my name equals tkinter label window text equals my name is Tom. Okay, there's that. Now, I created a my name text widget. Now I want to put it into the window where it's supposed to go. So I say myname.pack. Okay? And then again, I can run this, and when I do, here's the window that I get. And again, it's very small. It's just packing it in there as small as possible. Can we adjust this? Yes. Is it easy? It's a lot of trial and error. What else can we do? I don't like the fact, me personally, I don't like the fact that this always says TK. My program should be named whatever my program is. And let's start working with some other things that we can do. But that's a text widget. Basically, it's plain and simple. All it really does is it displays a line of text somewhere in the window that you created in whatever area. We can actually, we'll see later on, we'll work with frames. We can actually see that we can put it somewhere specific within a window if we so choose. So again, the first argument represents where the widget is going to go. They call it the root. The second argument shows, at least for the label widget, shows which text should appear in there. You saw we had a pack method. Again, pack pretty much says plop this in the window, in the root object, basically, and make it visible is what it is. Put it in there and let it show. Every window that you create, every object, every widget that you're going to make, you're going to have to place somewhere in that window, and the pack method is the most common one that we'll use. So you pretty much have to call it for everything that we create. You make a label, you pack it in there. You make a button, you pack it in there. Okay, and that's kind of how it works. There are some arguments, so we can move things around. I'll get to those shortly. But you can basically say which side do you want to put it in, the top, the bottom, the left, the right. And that's what we can do. We can do things with fill and expand to make them go a little wider. You'll see that when we get to those points. The interesting thing is that the positioning of things in a window also kind of happens in the order that you create them, which is why I say we might not necessarily be declaring all of our widget variables at the top of our document. We're going to create them on the fly as we go, which again, is the comments at the top keeping track of all our variables required? Well, I'd like to see it. It will help you keep organized too when we start doing a lot of widgets. So keep that in mind. So what do these things look like? Well, we just saw a few hello world. We're making widgets. We got our name in there, that kind of stuff. And isn't that still boring, right? Not much better than a blank window, but only by a little bit, right? So, and again, Plaque just plops it right in there. It doesn't help us organize things. To organize things, we need to use what's called the frame widget. So we're gonna basically do that. Let's see here. I'm gonna start off with some code here that I have. Let's do import tkinter. We're gonna say window equals tkinter.tk. So again, we're going to see the first thing here for window. Window.title is a method that will let you title your window whatever you want. So we can say, welcome to GUI land with Python. Okay, and then we're going to window.mainLoop. I'm not even going to bother with main right now. Where are we going to put this? We're going to call this GUI demonstration. All right. So let's run this. And when I run it, I get a blank window. No surprise. Oh, but look, I do not have TK over here anymore. Let me make this window a little bigger. Look at that. Welcome to GUI land with Python, just like we asked it to. How cool is that? All right. Now let's get some more stuff in here. So let's see here. We got our title. Let's get some labels in here, right? How about we're going to start with this one. I'm going to keep those together, okay? I've got a hello world. That's great. So again, I have hello world is my text. And I said, we had text equals, and we put the literal string right in the quotes there. You can do that. You can make a widget. You can make a variable that holds your text. That's fine too. So here I got a variable that's a string. It holds the phrase hello world. I'm creating a label and putting it in, making a label. I'm putting in the top frame. What's that? Let's get there. Let's do that. Let's see. After our windows here, let's use this frame command here, right? So we'll say top frame equals tkinter.frame, which is, again, it's a container that basically holds other widgets for us, effectively. We're gonna use that to it's basically a holding container. It's an invisible holding container for where we're going to put our stuff. Like any other widget, though, it needs to know where to go. So frame is going to go in window. I'm going to say give this a height of 50, and this is in pixels. And let's say make the background color, BG, let's make that red. Okay? So there's my frame. Now, like any other good widget, once I have my frame, I actually have to do something with it. So I'm going to say top frame dot pack. That puts the frame inside of the window. Then I can put my hello world text inside of top frame. Let me save this and let me run it. And let me move my main loop down to the bottom because that's where it needs to be. And then we'll rerun this here. And I just gotta move this over. When the window is that small, it's hard to grab it. So we have a frame here. We can't really see the background as red because actually our label covers it up. So if I come in here and I comment that all out and I rerun this, and then again I have to move my window over, now we can see we have this red frame, and we didn't tell it how wide to make it, and I told you that Pack makes things as small as possible. Now we gave it a height equals 50, so you can see this red line in here, but we didn't give it a width. Width equals 50 would be kind of small. Let's make it about 300 pixels. Okay, and we'll still keep it red. That way we can see what's going on here. Okay, save that, run it, and now I have a window that I can actually drag over. Look at that. Now we're getting somewhere. Now we can actually at least see some of our changes appear here. Okay, and we can see that I have this big giant space. Now it's only 300 pixels wide, and if you didn't know what 300 pixels was, it's about that big. And the 50 is, that too. So it is 6 times as wide as it is tall. Now let's come back in here and let's uncomment these, our label here. Okay, we'll save and we will execute, and oh no, now what? We are going to see that it's back to the small size again, because even though we said make our frame 300 pixels wide, as soon as we packed in our label, the frame became as small as it had to be to fit the label in there. And unfortunately, even when we make this window larger, we're still stuck with just that. It's frustrating. I said it's a bunch of trial and error, and we will trial and we will error for sure. But in the meantime, let's kind of keep moving on here. I'm going to make a second label here. Okay, and I'm going to put this in something called bottom frame, so I'll need a frame. Let's just do this. So we'll call this bottom frame. And I'm not going to worry about the colors or anything else at this point. We're going to put that right in window. Okay, so now we'll have 2 frames, and this won't look much different than we saw already, but when we make this over, so we still have 2 things kind of packed in there. I can say, when I pack, I can say, let's see, top frame, let's say side equals left. That was one of our commands from before. And I can do the same thing over here. Side equals left. We'll run that. And now I get a much longer window. And as you can see, it kind of slotted everything over to the left. So does that mean that if I make my bottom frame, and I will make it on the bottom shortly, if I make my bottom frame side equals right, will that kind of put them side by side again? And the answer to that question is yes. Yes, it does. And does it push the one over to the right? It sure does. See? What is left and what is right? Well, that's kind of one of the fun things about Pack. It's as small as humanly possible. Whatever the window is, cut it down the middle. One side's the left, the other side's the right, And that's kind of what you get. It is very arbitrary. It is not the easiest thing in the world to work with, but it's what we have for right now. It's what we're working with for right now. So we'll close that off and we'll kind of move on from there. But that is label. That's a frame, right? And you put your frame inside a window, and you put your window inside the frame, and that's kind of what it's looking like. Let's make another frame. If you're working along with me, and I really hope you are at this point, let's kind of do this again. So I got a top frame, I got a middle frame, I got a bottom frame. Let's make a middle frame, and I'm not going to care about the side equals left or right at this point. I'll just take that one out. I want to now make a middle frame, and again, this is a tkinter dot frame. We'll say window, and I think this is the one that we will give a height and a width to. I'm actually going to take it right off of there and put it onto the middle one. Middle frame dot pack. So again, one more time, we made a top frame and packed it in. Made a middle frame and packed that into the window. Made a bottom frame and packed that into the window. Okay? And I have my hello world in the top frame. And I have we are making widgets in the bottom frame. And this middle frame should be a red line. Actually, now it should be a red block because I decided to make it actually a width of 300. And it's going to be red, so we'll definitely see the difference. So let's drag this thing over here and look what we get. I left my side equals left here. And so what happened? Well, it made our middle frame not actually be in the middle anymore. It kind of shoved it right next to that. But you get to see how that works now. So again, and if you look, what's interesting is that left stays left, and this middle frame, we just said, just make it the next thing that you draw. It's not staying left or right or anything. It's just kind of plopping itself there. So when we rearrange this, you see we almost get like a tabbed off section there. Other things to consider when you're making this. So we have a left-hand frame, and everything else is not left. Now again, you can even try this and see where this moves things to. Save, rerun, and now we get this. And if we make our window wide enough, we will eventually get the we are making widgets on the right. And if you notice, as I drag this smaller to meet the bottom of the middle frame, it's still in the middle. You see, it still has to be above the bottom frame, even though bottom frame is supposed to be right. And if it's right, it's still going to be over there. So understanding how pack works is very, very much trial and error. So one more time now, if I take all of these side parameters off and rerun this, now we get something that looks more like a top, a middle, and a bottom. And again, packs it in as small as it has to be. Since there's nothing else in middle frame, it is holding to the rule that I said, which was make the height 50 and the width 300. So our window is staying that large. Close that up. So that is a frame. Now, we've got text labels. We have ways of laying things out in frames. What's next? How about make a button? Buttons are cool, right? We can say, let's see here. Where's my code? We'll just keep this going in order. We can say my button equals tkinter dot button. Where do I want to put this? I'm going to put this in the middle frame, I think. And I don't want to make another variable. We can just do text. I'm going to say this is my button. Okay? And then, of course, we've got to pack that button into the window. And it will go into middle frame. So we will get our window here, which has now been resized because we put it into the middle frame. And there we go. I'm going to make this a little larger so we can just mess with it here. We've got our hello world. We've got we are making widgets. In the middle frame, we've got my button. And you can see it acts like a button would. I can click this. What's the point of clicking it? It does absolutely nothing. What do buttons do? Well, that's kind of part of it, right? A button does whatever you tell it to do. By default, it's just a button. And you can see that we didn't have to write any code to make the button look like it was pushed in. That's handled all by the tkinter module and that main loop window. It listens for the event that the user used the mouse to click the button, and then it animates that button for us. And then, if we want to, we can do what's called a callback function, which is basically when you call a function that does something, like click a button, you can say, hey, handle this. When that's all done and it executes properly, when that function that clicks the button visually on the screen executes, also execute this callback function, which we say with command. And we say command equals whatever, and we give it some kind of command. Now, how do we do those commands? Well, that becomes kind of part of the fun at that point then, right? Let's learn something else first. We can learn a dialog box. If you've ever had an error, if you've ever had a syntax error when you're trying to execute your Python code, and you get the box that pops up that says syntax error, and it basically says syntax error and OK and nothing else. And you sit there and you go, okay, whatever. You click OK, and then it highlights where your syntax error was in red or whatever color you have for your idle environment options. But that box that pops up that says OK is basically a dialog box or an info box. They're called a whole bunch of different things. But tkinter calls it a message box. And so you can actually execute a message box, a dialog box, but you don't want those to pop up, because what they do, what an info box does, is it pops up and it kind of blocks everything else from your program from running. So they're really used specifically for like messages that you want to give to somebody as a warning or as a verification process sometimes. But we're going to make one right now. We're going to make a widget, and then instead of just letting it pop up, I'm going to show you how we can attach it using a callback function to our button. So, what is the format for this? Well, we use tkinter.messagebox.showInfo, and unfortunately, since they're not the most common things in the world, we actually have to import another module for it. And our module for that would be import tkinter.messagebox. So messagebox is not actually part of the standard tkinter that you bring in. If that gives you an idea of how not often you should use them. But let's see, we'll keep our Windows stuff together here. I am going to right here make a function. Okay? We're going to make a function called do something. I know that sounds so descriptive. We're going to tab in, and I'm going to say tkinter.messagebox.showInfo. Notice I'm not assigning a variable. This is not a widget that gets shoved into our window. This is a different window that gets popped up and created on a temporary basis just to show some info and then do something else. There's actually warnings and other things. We're just going to use the info box for right now. Okay, show info, and then we have to give it two things, a title and a message. Now the title is that, in my screen it's orange, the title bar of the window. So I'm going to say, let's say this is just response. Okay, and then I'm going to say, as the message in this info box, thanks for clicking the button. Make this a little longer. Now we've really got some wide code here. All right, and that's what our line looks like here. Okay. Tkinter message box show info with a title and a message. Here's the title of the window, and here's the message that's going to go into there. And what this should look like when we execute it is we're going to have our hello world, our my button, or we are making widgets. We're going to click on my button, and then, oops, and then we're going to see this info box pop up on the screen. Okay, so let me get in here, save our code, and execute it. And we can drag this window right over. Let's just minimize this for now. So, make this a little bigger so I can actually move it. Here is our window with our program. Okay? And when I click this, it's going to be on the other screen. I'll drag it over. But maybe you'll hear it too when it goes. I'm going to click this. And nothing happened. Why didn't it happen? Because we didn't assign it to the button yet. So let's go back a phrase here. Our button has to have a callback functionality, as I said. And we do that with a command. So we're going to find our button down here. So we have tkinter button. We assigned it to middle frame. We assigned some text to it. And now we're going to assign one more thing to it. We're going to say command equals do something. Now, if that do something looks familiar, it is the same thing we called our function up here. But if it looks like it's missing something, you are correct. When we call a function or a method, there's always parentheses around it. This is not exactly calling a function. Command equals says, hey, go find the function with this name and go run it. And so you just do it without the parentheses. Okay, so let's just save this. We will run this. And we will drag our window back over here. Minimize this so we can see it all. I'll make this a little bigger just so I can move this thing around. All right, now, when I click this button, you may hear a beep come through my microphone, you may not, and it will pop up the info box that I will promptly drag over onto the screen. Oh, actually, it came up right there. How lovely for me. And there it is. And, like our code suggested, I can't even get to my application now. That's what info boxes do. They interrupt the process altogether. So if I want to drag this over, let's get back to what we were talking about here. That's what we should be looking at, right? And we have our info box here. So here's our program. Click on my button, and here's our response. And again, as you can see, I can't do anything back into my program over here until I take care of this info box here. Thank you for clicking on the button. All right. We say OK, and we're back into our program again. Nice and neat, and yeah. Now I keep clicking on that X to close this up, right? What if we wanted to make an actual quit button, an actual exit button of sorts, if you will? We can do that. Let me get our program back here. We can... Where's my button? Buttons are down here. Let's just make another one. Let's just say quit button equals, what are we doing? Tkinter dot button. We'll put this in the middle frame too. Why not? Comma text equals exit. Quit, exit. We'll just say exit. Command. Well, there is a function that we can call that we don't have to write ourselves to exit a program gracefully. We have a window. That window is our main everything for this program. And there is a method called destroy. And you call method, if you call the destroy method, it actually sounds not graceful, but it actually gracefully shuts down all the Python functions. It stops the main loop, and it closes the window and returns you back to whatever environment you were in before you launched that program. So we'll say window.destroy, which again looks a lot like a method, and I'm really tempted to put parentheses after that. And you notice we don't have it defined here. It just kind of does its thing. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to run this. But I'm going to realize that I didn't pack my button in there. So quit button dot pack. Now we'll run this. And I just can't drag it because it's just not big enough. All right. We have our program here. We have our hello world. We have our frame here. And we have our lower frame here where we're making widgets. Now, you do see a little bit of red. Why do we see some red? Because that middle frame is still red in the background. My button takes up a lot of space, and the middle frame takes up exactly as much space as my button takes up. But the exit button with less words, less characters, is smaller, so we can see the red background around it. But that red background, I promise you, has been there the whole time. It's just covered up by my button because my button fills the space. And again, pack, by nature, shrinks things down to the smallest space possible. Now, so we know our my button does this response dialog box. Exit is supposed to destroy this whole window, this whole big window here, and exit our program gracefully. So you ready? We'll click the exit button, and there it goes. And interesting thing here, I'll bring this over here so we can see it. I will run our code one more time. And of course, it's never on the same window that I want it to be on. We'll drag it over. Now again, if you notice, our Python shell here, we restarted the program, there is no prompt. Right where this window should be. When I click our exit button, it will close the program gracefully, and it will return back to the Python shell. Ready? 1, 2, 3. And we get our prompt back, now that our program has gracefully ended. That's buttons. That's a lot of stuff we've got right now. So we've got our quit button. We've got all kinds of stuff. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg of all the things that we are able to do with the tkinter module. So what's next? We've got buttons, we've got labels. Now we need to do something. Most of the stuff we said right from week 1. A program has input, it has processing, it has output. The graphical environment is not exactly output, it's just kind of a new environment, but there's things happening, and the labels are kind of an output. So we've got that part down. We certainly have some processing down when we say when something happens, call a function that will either pop up an info box or quits the program. So now we need to be able to type some stuff in and work with that. So that would be the entry widget, which is a single line of text that the user can type into. We've seen them before. If you've used Google before, you type a search box in there. That's a single line of text entry when you type into the Google search window. So again, now what happens when you type in there? There is no enter button per se. There's nothing to do. It might just be a little box. So we have to use a method just like we do with buttons. This would be the get method. And the get method just kind of figures out what the user typed in there and just kind of pulls it out of there and stores it in a variable in memory or wherever you catch it. It returns a string. And if that sounds familiar to you, it's just like when we used to take text input from a command line, right? We had to cast things. So if you needed a string, you were fine. But if you needed a number, like an int or some such thing, then you int or a float, you would need to actually cast that. And the same applies to the get method of a entry widget. So let's move on here. We're going to just see one. There's a program in your book that I'm going to follow along with right now that basically asks you for kilometers, and then it can kind of converts it for you to miles. And we're going to do that with a entry box in the, just kind of turn this on here. We're going to do it with a entry box here where we're typing in some text. We'll hit the convert button, which we'll call a function that will calculate that for us, and then display it in an info box for us as well. So we're going to do that here. So now, again, as I said earlier, I have taken out all of the object-oriented programming stuff along with this, and all I'm left with is some simple elements here. Okay? As such, when I try to run some of this, it's not going to look the same as what's in your book. So I need you to keep that in mind as we go through. So one of those things I'm going to do is I'm actually going to remove main here. And I'm going to take all of these and kind of indent them outward. And then just to make sure that this is first, I'm going to move that to the top. Okay. So now what we have here is, well, let's look at it. We have our main window. We're creating a window. We got a top frame, a bottom frame. We have a label that's going to ask us to enter the distance in kilometers. Then we have an entry. And again, entry widget looks like this. We have a variable for it. Kilo entry. What are we entering? What are we having the user enter? It's a tkinter entry. Let me clean this up here. Don't know why the book does this. We're going to put it in top frame, which we have defined up here as a frame. We're going to give it the width of 10. And that's just how many characters it's going to be able to hold. So we can do several, well over a million. A million would be 7, right? So billion, trillion, quintillion digits, or well, kilometers, I guess it would be. We're going to pack in our prompt label. We're going to pack in our kilo entry box. We're going to make 2 buttons. A calculate button that will actually convert the formula for us, and the command is going to be convert. which is our function up here. And we're going to have a quit button. That's going to destroy the main window. Okay? We'll pack our buttons in, we'll pack our frames in, and we have a main loop. Okay, so that's pretty much everything. Now, let's look at this convert box. So again, what's happening here? Let me just move to the next screen and you'll get an idea. What we want to do is we want to create basically this, this program here that will enter a distance in kilometers, 1,000. When we click convert, it's going to pop up an info box here that will say, okay, that's equal to whatever, and do the conversion. So what does that conversion look like? Well, that conversion looks like this. It's going to take kilo, which is a global variable at this point. Yes, I said we're going to relax it for this week. Kilo is going to be equal to, well, casting the float of, look at this here, kilo entry dot get. Now again, let's repeat this. What was kilo entry? That was our widget that creates the kilometers text box that we will type into, the entry box. Okay? We called it kilo entry. And I said over here that this has a get method that's used to retrieve the data that's inside that box. So we've created this entry widget. We're going to use the get method on it to get the value of the data inside there. So again, in this case, kiloentry.get right here, and it is a function, so we are using the two parentheses here, and the only difference is we're casting it to a float. And again, like I said before, when we typed an input statement, when we were doing the command line interface and we asked a user for input, and we said, if we were to say type in the amount of kilometers, the user would type in some number and they'd press enter, and then we had to catch that, right? We'd say some variable, kilo maybe in this case, equals input, whatever our prompt was for that. But we'd cast the whole input as a float or as an int because we wanted to be able to work with it as a number, not as a string. So we're doing the same thing here. It's no different. We're casting this get function to a float. And this get function, this get method, is for all intents and purposes in the GUI world the same as an input statement in the command line world. Okay, so kilo equals cast to a float, whatever is in this entry box. Now we can calculate with it because it's now a float. So we can say miles equals kilo times 6214. And yes, I won't be a complete stickler. Let's say kilometers to miles ratio equals 0.6214. I can hear each and every one of you out there screaming at me through this video window. I can just hear it. That would be more appropriate. I'm not relaxing all the rules. So, we've got our named constant here. It is in caps. I'm not taking myself points off for that either. Miles equals kilo times our ratio here. And now we're going to display that. Now we're still tabbed in here, as you can see. We're going to display that in an info box here. So we're going to say results is our title of our window. And we're going to say string kilo. Now we're using a string here because the message has to be a string. Plus, because when we're using strings, we use a plus instead of a comma to separate our results. Kilometers is equal to plus string miles plus miles. And again, we have to cast these as strings. Many of you have been doing this all along in our labs anyway. So we will save this, we will run this, and hopefully I get a box over here with a TK in it that I absolutely, horribly hate. So I'm going to come down here real fast and just say main window dot title kilometers converter, because I really, really like my titles. And now you can see that our window doesn't say TK anymore. It now says kilometers converter top. Now enter a distance in kilometers. Let's keep it simple. 1,000. And then I can click on convert. And there is my results box. 1,000 kilometers, 1,000.0 kilometers, since we did cast it to a float, is equal to 621.4 miles. And if that is cast to a float, that means I can do, am I out of space there? Let's just say 10.1, convert, and we get that. Now, same rules apply here. If we are getting these really large amounts here, we may want to format this a little bit better. So we can say format, no, we can say that down here. Format miles. It's still got to cast it as a string, don't we? Format miles. I think 3 decimal places would be enough here. Save that. We'll close this all out. We will rerun it. Drag this over here. And now we'll say 10 point. My numlock was on. That might be helpful. 100.10. That works. Convert. And now we have 3 decimal places. Looks a little better. To make it the same as it was before, we had 10.1, I believe, right? So 10.1, convert. And now again, we don't have that long, dragged out, ugly thing. We have something very specific that we set the format on. Can take that out. And again, we have truncated it down to the 3 decimal places. So a lot of what we've done already does work here, okay? We're not changing the rules. We're just adding a few extra steps to it, okay? That would be a result in a message box window, and that's all well and good. But what if we wanted to actually display it in such a way where it's still in that window? Because the dialog box, it stops everything. If I made a typo and hit convert too fast and I want to go back, I got to close the dialog box. It might move around on me. So how do we take care of that? Well, we have a function for that too. We have a way of doing it. Instead of popping your answer into an info box, you can pop your answer into a label widget. So you can basically make an empty label widget. It packs into the window in a certain space, and then you can replace the value of it, just like a variable. We might initialize a variable to 0 initially. Think about your lab last week. You might initialize a variable to 0, and you might increment the counter, or you might increment your change your high score. You got a placeholder for it when you initialize it. Then you simply just replace the value of it later on. So let's look at this one here. We've got import to Kinter. I am not importing the message box window this time. Okay. I've got my conversion here. I've taken out some of the stuff. I've left the decimal place in here for now. Yes, yell at me through the screen. Go for it. I've got my title window, kilometers to miles converter. But let's go down here and look at our calculating button. Nope, we're doing it right here. Sorry. Where are we here? We have our prompt label, enter a distance in kilometers. I'm just going to close this up a little bit here so you can see the window side by side. The next thing we have is our kilo entry, which is the white text entry area there, right? Now I have prompt label, which I'm packing in, and kilo entry, which I'm packing in. So these are all there, and our top frame is set, okay? Now we have a description label, and that is text that says converted to miles, which is basically my next line in this window, okay? The value for that, then I have a value variable. What is value? Equals to Kinter string var. This is new. This is basically a separate kind of class. And I did say that we were working with objects. Everything in Kinter is an object. So what it is it's a module that you can use. It's a class you can use that basically, with a widget, helps you display data. And it's essentially like declaring a new string variable. You might say value equals single tick, single quote, right? And that just means an empty string until you replace that value later on. Same thing here. Value equals to Kinter.string var, and please note the capitalization here with the capital S and the capital V. Parentheses, because it is a method. Value equals to Kinter string var, and that basically makes a blank label to put in there. Then we have miles label, which is a label, mid-frame, And instead of saying text equals this time, like we do for enter a distance and convert it to miles, we say text variable equals. And that means we are going to use, obviously, a variable in here instead of text. Now, again, when I create a label here, I could use a variable. We've used that before. I can use this literal string. Either way, that can't change. When we use text variable instead of text equals, that's saying, hey, this value is going to change, and you have to give it a variable here at this point. And what variable are we giving it? Well, the one we created right up here on line 31, where I say value equals tkinter.stringvar, which basically just creates a blank label widget that is going to have some kind of text in it. Okay? The string part of that should give it away. It's creating a string variable is essentially what this method does. Okay? And again, we'll take our description label and our miles label and we'll pack them right inside here. So now when I run this program, what I get is a beautiful title. I love that. I've got my enter a distance in kilometers. I've got my text entry box here. I've got converted to miles, and you see it's blank underneath there. And if I just keep it simple and say 1,000, when I click on convert here, it pops it right under in there. Hopefully, like we have it there. Okay? And again, I can just keep adding numbers here. I can... and this value under here converted to miles keeps changing. What's rather interesting to me actually is that as you change that, the length of the frame underneath that's holding converted to miles and the string var label changes size and keeps making it grow. But it's dynamic in that respect. Pack is making it as small as possible. But the bigger point here is that we have this variable, this string var that's assigned to our miles label that we know is going to be changing text. And that is where we really get some solid output for the input that we're having here with what our user is doing and having a lot of fun with it. You will be working on a lab almost exactly like this next week. It'll have a few different things to input with it, but the same kind of thing. I'm looking for some frames to keep things organized. If you can do it without frames, more power to you. I'm looking for a text input with an entry widget. I'm looking for a string var that you can put a value in here. I'm looking for a button that does some kind of function, just like we do up in here. And I'm looking for a quit button that will gracefully exit the program and close the window. So be very familiar with this. And if you need to watch this over and over again, go right ahead. This is right out of your book. Again, the caveat that I said from earlier in this lecture, that you've got to clear out a lot of that extra object stuff that I showed you in this video on the last one, and that I've got again in the slides here. So again, string var class basically is a module that holds a variable, creates the variable for you, and you can use that to put your output inside a label field for your programs that you're running in a GUI environment. And again, looks like this as opposed to that pop-up box. All right, I am going to skip through a whole bunch of this. There's so much to do. And if you want to play with these kind of things, please knock yourself out. There will be some test questions in the future. There will be probably a quiz on this in the future. And we'll cover some of these buttons and some of these other objects. Your lab will not, but it's an option you might want to do for future labs as we start getting to more fun stuff. And if you wanted to turn one of your projects into a GUI project, you may want to know how this works too. Happy to answer any questions privately on Zoom or in office hours. But a radio button, what is a radio button? Well, it's a small circle that kind of, it's a little circle that appears usually in a group. And when you click one, only that one can be clicked on, not multiple. And if you click on a different one, then the first one you clicked on gets unclicked and plugged back in again. Why are they called radio buttons? Graphic failed me here. If you think about your old school or car radios, I mean, back from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even still now, you still have push buttons on the radios to hit your preset buttons. Back in the day, they actually pushed in and stayed in. And so that was kind of the whole idea here, is you push a virtual button in online and it stays selected. When you push the next button to go to another station, you can't play two stations at once. when you push that in, the other one popped out, and then the one you pushed stayed in. And that's where that whole interface radio button thing came from. There are more classes you need to do in addition to creating these radio buttons. You need to import a class, just like the string var. You need to import an int var class. So let's look at this right fast here. So again, we got tkinter, we got a message box. I've got a function here that basically all it's going to do is pop up a message box that says you selected option, and then it's going to use another get function, very much like the entry box, to see radio var get and get that information from there. So let's look. Main window equals tkinter. Great, we got a top frame and a bottom frame that are going in the main window. And we have radio var. Radio var is our variable for our radio button. Very unoriginal name here. Maybe we call this option var. I don't know. Tkinter.intvar, which is very much like what we just used in the previous example, where like for our label, where this is an int var instead of a string var. We have radiovar.set1. What this does is it automatically sets something to be the default one selected. We'll see that, and then I'll turn it off, and I'll show you how this all works. Now we have 3 radio button widgets we are creating. RB1, RB2, RB3. Tkinter.radioButton, it has a few variables to it. Top frame, this is where it's going, just like window or any other frame we're going to put it in. Op text, option 1. This is the label that's going to go next to our radio button. There's a variable assigned to it. So this has text and a variable. And the variable it's assigned to is radio var. Okay, right up in here. And it's initialized to 1 right now. The value of this is 1. The value of this is 2. The value of this is 3. So we have our 3 radio buttons with text, option 1, option 2, option 3, with a variable. Now, if you notice, all 3 of these buttons are assigned to the same variable. That means you have 3 different elements that are assigned to the same variable. Because, again, only one of these may be clicked at a time. Because of that, they have to take the same value, the same variable, with a different value. So here's the variable, and we're going to assign it 1. This is kind of like if we said, hey, we got a variable called radio var, and we want it to equal whatever. Well, in this case, it's going to be equal 1, 2, or 3, depending on which one of these buttons gets clicked. We'll pack the buttons in. We'll have an OK button and a quit button. We'll pack those buttons in. We'll pack our 2 frames together, and we'll run our main loop. Let's look at this and see how it looks. Okay, and again, window off screen. Option 1, option 2, option 3. Notice that option 1 is clicked in by default. If I say OK, then our info box, like we saw before, tells us, hey, you selected option 1. Why option 1? Well, because option 1 was the text here, and the value is 1. Okay, it got passed to here. And we said you selected option 1. Or we can say something like the value of your option is, okay, save that. Now over here I said I promised you that we would look at this default initialization of our variable here. I could set it to 3 if I wanted to. Okay, we'll save this, we'll run it, we'll drag our window over, and option 3 comes started. I didn't do that. It came that way, I promise you. Option 1, option 2, option 3, we click, and look, we change the text that says the value of our option is 3, just to show you where these things came from. Okay, but we again are assigning the value based on this. Okay, those are radio buttons. Let's go back and gracefully close that window out. Those are radio buttons. Again, they all have the same variable object. They are each assigned the value for that int var or whatever variable we use based on what we set in the code for radio button. And when one of them is selected, then that gets plopped into the value point there. Check buttons, or check boxes as most people call them, are a little bit different. They appear with they're a square checkbox, and just kind of like, check your name off the list. The difference between a checkbox and a radio button is that you can have more than one. They are not mutually exclusive. So if you've got a string of checkboxes, you can select more than one. And we've seen that on some of the quizzes. I've said, more than one answer is okay for some of those questions. Tkinter calls them check buttons. They use the check button widget name, the check button class. And again, they look like this if you ever see them on your screen. Okay. The biggest difference here is that checkboxes, you can have multiple options. Radio buttons, you only have the one grouping there, right? So again, let's see here. Let's grab my code. We have Tkinter message box. Again, we have a show choice function that all it says is you selected, and then we'll put a list of them. Look at this interesting thing. New line character. You can use new line characters? Sure, you can. If you use it in a label, it just makes your label get longer. If you use it in one of these info boxes, it makes that get longer too. And we're going to see what this looks like. So again, here it looks like we're using a bunch of if statements. Why would we do that? Well, we don't want to have errors in our program that will make them crash. Let me scroll down, then I'll scroll back up. We've got, again, our main window. We've got our top and bottom frame that we've been using the whole time. I have three variables, checkbox var1, checkbox var2, checkbox var3, that are Tkinter int var methods here being called to create these integer variables. I'm going to set them all to be 0 initially. Remember when I said initializing your variables is a good thing? Here's one more explanation of where that is and why that should be. cd1 tkinter.checkButton top frame. Text is going to be option 1. Let's see if we can move this over here. And it's going to be assigned variable cbvar1. No value for this yet. Option 2, cbvar2. Option 3, cbvar3. Okay? We can call this A, B, and C if we want, but we're assigning these int values, so we'll just leave them as 1, 2, and 3. But your text label is whatever you want. We're going to pack our buttons. We're going to make our OK and quit buttons and pack those in there too. We're going to pack our frames and pack our loop. Now, what happens with all this? Well, when we click on our OK button, we're going to run show choice. That function, again, was back up here. And if you look at our indentation, it's lines 5 through 19 here. Okay? So what's in here? Well, we got a message, you selected, and then it's going to put a line break. If var1 get, and remember, get is the method that sees if there's any data in there, equals 1, we're going to print a message. We're going to add to the message. Message equals whatever the message was before plus 1 new line. If there's a value for 2 that equals 1, then we're going to add to the message and say 2. And if there's a value of 1 for 3, then we're going to add to the message and do this. Now, interesting how this looks. Then we're going to actually run the message box and show a dialog box here. So I'm going to leave this up. I'm going to kind of drag it over here a little bit. I am going to save and run this program. I am going to move my window over here. And I've got checkboxes now. Option 1, option 2, option 3. If I say OK by itself without checkboxes, my function will still run because it's attached to the OK button. You selected, and there's a space here, and there's nothing else. If I select option 1, what that does is it assigns cbvar1 to the value of 1. Notice down here, we didn't actually give it a value. We just said whatever. When it's checked, it's a 1. When it's not, it's a 0. So if I say option 1 and I say OK, I now see I selected 1, and you can see where that new line comes into effect. I can now uncheck option 1 and run this again, and you see I selected nothing. When it's not checked, it's 0. When it is checked, it's 1. That's how we can determine all of this. I can check all 3 of them, and now I see 1, 2, and 3. I can leave 1 and 3. Again, same thing. And while it looks a little more complex. It really is the same basic things that we've been doing this whole time, right? Quit out of here. And let's just look at this. Again, we're importing. We've got our function here. And we know that we have a variable called cbvar1, and we know that because of this interface, we're starting them all off at zeros. We have set and we have get, if you haven't noticed that too, by the way. Anybody who's done work with object-oriented programs, especially anybody who's worked with games, you know about setters and getters. Same kind of concept here because these widgets are objects. If you didn't know what I was talking about just then, don't worry about it. What we do know is that we have cb var1, var2, var3. We know we initialize them to 0. And through the user interface, if they click the button, then that will be set to 1. And we know that because we say, hey, this button is going to control var1. And again, I can change these names to whatever I want. I can call this A, B, and C if I really wanted to. I worry that I wouldn't get all the right ones, but I guess we can do that here. Let's see. A, replace all. So we'll just do that. Save it, run it, and hope for the best here, because I always love doing these live demos when I haven't planned for them. And I set A as CB1, so if I do this, it still works. Because the variable is named A, and I just reused A all over the place here. Here, where I declare the int var. Here, where I set it to its base value. And here, when I say what variable I'm going to use when that checkbox is checked. Those are the only things that are different, but the fact that you have a variable called A that is of a certain type, in this case an int, 1 or 0, and the fact that you're assigning it to something. Now, the way it's being assigned in this case is a little different. Okay? When I call a function, that function is still going to look to see if A has a value to it. And instead of saying if A equals 1, we're saying if A.get equals 1 because it's a special kind of variable. It isn't exactly an int. It's an int var, which is a special object within tkinter. That's it, though. We've worked with methods before. We've worked with functions before. None of this should be very, very different to you. And hopefully it's not too much for you. Now, I do want to close this off, but I do want to close it off kind of quickly. You will have a few questions on this for your lab next week, but you're not going to be required to do this. It's just a lot of fun. You can also draw shapes with Canvas. You can do all kinds of things as long as you have all the right shapes and points and whatnot. So effectively what you end up doing here is you end up creating a blank window, and that blank window actually has a coordinate system to it. So when you create your window, you then create what's called a canvas. The canvas widget has a geometry to it. So let me drag this over here, okay? And we say, again, we're importing tkinter, we have our main window, we have our main loop. The only thing we're adding here are these lines. Canvas equals tkinter canvas. Takes the same format as our previous things, our labels and our buttons and our everything. We're going to put the canvas on main window, and we're going to give it a geometry of 200 by 200. And I promise you this one will stay. Then we can actually use canvas functions to do things. There is create lines. Now, if you look at what I've got over here, if you look at what I got over here, actually, you see that when we draw a window, the very, very top left-hand corner becomes x and y coordinates 0, 0. So the x-axis goes left to right, just like we're used to. This left-hand side is 0, and this far side over here is going to be 200. Okay? Or more to the point, 0 and 199. Okay? If we're creating a 200 by 200 grid. The y is still the up and down axis, and it starts over here on the left at top left at 0, and down here will be the 199. So if we said 0, 0, it's up here. If we said 200, 200, or 199, 199, it's down here in this corner. Forget what the labels are on this picture. Half of 199 is about 100. 100, 0. 100, 100. 100, 199. Again, y going from 0 to 199 up and down. X going from 0 to 199 left to right. And again, here's our code for this. We have oops, sorry about that. We have a create line function that says start at 0, 0, which again is your top left. Go to 199, 199, which is your bottom right. Then create another line from 199, 0, that would be the farthest right X position, topmost Y, down to the bottommost Y position of 199, but the leftmost X position of 0. So effectively, it should make an X for us. Okay? And again, let's just look at this here. Thought I had that somewhere here. But there you go. There's your code. It creates a window. You create the canvas. Okay? There are actually all these different functions. Create line, create rectangle, create oval, arc, polygon, text. Yes, you can create a text label within the canvas system. It doesn't work as well as you'd want it to, though. Drawing a line. Again, here we go. Canvas dot create line. Your starting XY, your ending XY, and there's different options. You can have the thickness of the line. You could have all kinds of things. Thickness of the line, color of the line, that kind of stuff. Dotted, dashed, that kind of thing. Here's our program. That's the whole program. Again, I have it here already. And ideally, this is what it's going to create, this X function. So let's bring it up here, and I'll drag it over. It's big enough. I can actually drag it over. There we go. There's our X. Plain and simple. Nothing really fancy out of the ordinary. You can use this to create lines in certain places. This would be the start of your gaming stuff, and there's other things you can do. I wouldn't do a ton of graphical stuff within Python, but if you wanted to make more visual elements to the program that you're creating, you can put a canvas in and use some lines and rectangles, maybe make a frame inside the canvas. I'm not sure if that's possible. And there you are. So again, here's our code. Again, it creates a line, creates a second line, just kind of going from corner to corner. Drawing a rectangle is kind of similar, the coordinates of the upper left and the coordinates of the lower right, and it fills the rest of it in for you, just like that. Again, take these programs in your book with a grain of salt. We are not going to use any of the class stuff that's in here. So you'll take out class my GUI, and you'll take off the init initial function, and you'll take this off here. Then you will take all these lines from 6 to 19 and just kind of out-tab them to the left-hand side here. Okay. But again, you get the idea here. You've got an oval, you got a square here. An oval is the same thing. It's just like an X. It's just like a rectangle rather, where you have an upper XY bound or a lower XY bound, but it's not exactly the same. The upper bound of the oval and the leftmost bound of the oval, if they could meet in the middle, that's why they're dotted lines here, that's where the XY position would be. Same thing on the lower bound. Drawing an arc. Again, little math involved with this one. The coordinates of the upper left-hand corner of the bounding circle or oval that you have, the coordinates of the lower right part of the binding circle, it's the whole circle, the starting angle. So if this was this, it would be 0, 45 degrees, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, whatever, and then how wide it's going to be. So make an arc that looks something similar to that. Start at 45, and then go to 30 more degrees. Drawing a polygon is actually quite interesting. You basically keep plotting out X and Y points to create a polygon. And then when you get to the very last one, you don't have to go back to the first one. The Canvas program will automatically connect the last dot for you. So you start, if you're doing an 8-sided polygon, you do one, put my mouse pointer on here for you. You do the first one, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth. And after that, the last one is 2060, as you can see over in here. When you're done, it automatically connects the dot back to the starting point that you had. So it looks something like that. You can fill it, you can not fill it, change the colors, all that kind of stuff. Lastly, you can also throw a text label into a Canvas object. You give it an X and Y point of where the text is going to start. Give it a value for text. It could be a literal string or it could be a variable. And again, there's options for color and size and font and some other things. And you get something that looks like that. Nothing really fancy. I covered through Canvas real fast. There's enough for you to go on. Canvas is fun for drawing and making other elements. You can even load images in there if you wanted to. But what we're going to focus on for the lab next week is your labels. is using a button to create a function, and throw some pizzazz in there. I will throw some resources out from the internet into the week's lecture as we go by, and I'll add some things into the lab for next week to show you how to stylize things and add color and other pizzazz and play with that in there. Your book actually covers a little bit of it as well. So there you are. That is the tkinter module within Python. There is a lot. Focus a lot on practicing some of these exercises. Again, if you're going to do them, I will remind you, do not use the object-oriented approach. And when you do your labs next week, even if you know how to use objects, that's nice. Not for next week's lab. And this is I'll have it in the lab doc as well, but this is your one request from me. Do not use the object-oriented approach for right now. Okay? Finally replace all the self dots and replace it with literally nothing. Remove the self parameter in any functions you might see, like the do something function, and remove those class and init references. They should be the only ones as far as the book examples are concerned. Those should be the only lines you got to remove. Okay? At that, I hope you have the most wonderful of weeks. This is the last new content for what we are doing in this course, and we will talk to you soon.